Hello, my name is David Nolan, and I'm the host of Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. Today, I'm handing the reins over to Bill Michaelson, CEO of the American Academy of Actuaries, who's talking with Darrell Knapp, the Academy's president. Bill, take it away.
So Darrell, you became president of the Academy in November of 2024, and you're nearing the end of your one-year term. How did you approach your presidency?
I think my primary focus was not to break anything. In all honesty, the Academy really runs well on its own. And I think that my focus of being president was really to try to make sure that things kept running well and then look at areas where we thought we could make some improvements. The organization is really kind of in a fairly mature phase. A lot of our focus in the last year, both at the board and at staff issues, I think, is to say, how can we do things better? How can we do a better job of communicating what we are doing and make sure that people understand the value that the Academy brings, the value that it brings to members and to the public, and how can we do a better job as the Academy of fulfilling the mission of the Academy.
Would you say it lived up to your expectations?
I think, that there were some things that we got accomplished that I really feel good about. There were some things that I think are still in progress and still need to be worked on. But all in all, it probably lived up to expectations.
As you wrap up your presidency, what would you say the one thing that you feel has been the most impactful the board has done this year? What would you say it is?
I think we really, at the beginning of the year, or even perhaps at the end of last year, at the end of Lisa Spotnick's presidency, we added several new committees that I think really will have a large benefit going forward. A volunteer engagement committee, a committee on emerging leaders, a international committee, a committee on the recognition of the MAA credential itself, and then an employer value committee really looking at focusing on the value that employers get out of the Academy.
Excellent. Were there any particular themes you focused on as president?
Probably a theme of value is the biggest one, that I feel like the Academy does a lot of wonderful things, both in the areas of professionalism and public policy, and we don't necessarily always do a good job of tooting our own horn and saying, here's the great things that we're doing, and making sure that people recognize the value that the Academy's bringing, both to the public and to the U.S. actuarial profession.
Now, I'd like to learn a little bit more about your experience as an actuary. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and just how you became interested or you became an actuary?
I was good in math in high school, and it came naturally to me. Went to a school with an actuarial program and really evolved that way, and spent my entire career as a health actuary. My genesis to health actuary was kind of unique. When I was actually interviewing for actuarial jobs, I was in Houston and was basically looked up the employers in the area, and one employer had me interview with their group health actuary, but they said they didn't have a position. Another employer, the group health actuary that I interviewed with, was actually leaving the company a couple of days later. But the first person had sold me on the idea of working in group health, and I found that whole area of the profession very interesting. And so I ended up in health and have, feel like I've had a wonderful career in that.
Now, as you look back on your career and you talk to students and prospective actuaries, what would you tell them you have found most fulfilling about being an actuary?
I think as an actuary, you're in a unique position to have an impact on the organization you work for, as well as, through volunteer efforts, especially with the Academy. I feel like I've had an impact on the public or on public policy, in addition to the impact that I had in my job. But I spent most of my career working with Ernst & Young as a consultant, and generally found that I could walk into a client and as an actuary was pretty well respected, and they'd listen to me, and that's not necessarily true in all jobs, that you have that kind of level of respect because of what you're walking in as.
Now, you mentioned volunteerism, and I know you've been chair of the ASB, you've been an active volunteer for years, you've been a leader on the faculty for the Life Health Qualification Seminar. What has volunteering meant to you in your career?
I guess a couple of things. One is, the job's been wonderful to me, and I think each of us have some responsibility to give back to the profession as part of the job. But, volunteering has been much more than giving back. Each of the things that I've been involved with as a volunteer, you learn so much more than what you really are putting into it. In a lot of respects, volunteering was a way to both credentialize yourself, but also actually gain a great deal of knowledge and become an expert in the field that you may be working in. And then, working with the Actuarial Standards Board that you mentioned was, a wonderful volunteer opportunity, a way to try to set standards for the profession and really make a difference for, a lasting difference for the profession.
So in your year as president, you've been writing quite a bit for Contingencies magazine in your column. In that context, what would you want the public or other actuaries to know about the Academy and the role that we play?
First of all, there's a question of why don't people volunteer? And I think, again, I've gotten so much out of volunteering that I think I'd want all actuaries to say, hey, this is a great idea. Let's go and volunteer and be involved, whether that's volunteering with the Academy, which I've probably done more time volunteering with the Academy than other organizations or one of the other actuarial organizations. But it's just a great way to give back to the public, to develop a network, to credentialize. I mean, there's so many benefits to volunteering that it sometimes amazes me that we have such a small percentage of our members or a small percentage of actuaries that are actively volunteering. I think, broader than that, I think that, that it's important to recognize the value that the Academy provides, both in terms of support of professionalism and support of public policy.
Now, on public policy, you've been an active participant in our annual Hill visits, and I know you've been present in presentations to the NAIC. What does public policy mean to you, and how should actuaries view the work the Academy is doing on their behalf?
I'll answer that question with a little bit of a story that I remember, very early in my actuarial career, there was some discussion around national health insurance, and this was, before the Affordable Care Act. And I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and in Washington, D.C., you hear about everything that's going on the Hill just by, osmosis or whatever. And I was talking to another actuary and really saying, there's people that are making policy decisions here that don't really understand the questions, that don't understand the possible ramifications of what they're doing. As actuaries, we really need to have a way to have a voice in that, to give the politicians or the policymakers a mechanism for understanding the ramifications of decisions that they're looking at making or potential policy decisions they're making. And the Academy does that. I mean, that's the big public policy function of the Academy, is provides the actuarial voice to those policymakers, which I think is just critical. And the NAIC, in similar, not on a national basis, but on a state basis, is really kind of, again, that there are public policy decisions that the actuaries have significant knowledge and input to, and just, again, it's critical that we make our voice heard as a profession to help make better outcomes as those decisions are made.
The Academy has core values that focus on independence, objectivity, and balance. What do those words mean to you in the context of the work that we do, and how should members, actuaries, stakeholders think of the work the Academy does in the context of those core values?
So it's interesting that you ask about the core values, because that was one of the things that I did as president-elect and chairing the Strategic Planning Committee. Independence, objectivity, and balance are really, I think, what gets us credibility in the public policy sphere. That we don't take a position, we aren't involved in the political debate, so to speak, but we're really trying to say, if you take this course of action, here's what we think will happen. If you take this course of action, something different is going to happen. I think that if we lose those core values, if we stray from those core values, we run a danger of losing all of the credibility that we have with the politicians. When you mentioned that I've done Hill visits a number of times, that, when you go on Capitol Hill and talk to policymakers, and they know that you aren't there selling a position, but you're there really trying to provide assistance to them, that, their whole tone of voice changes and their whole outlook and how they view you really changes significantly. And I can only speak to the health side, but what's allowed us on the health side to be so effective over a lengthy period of time.
Let me take a moment to remind listeners that you're listening to Actuary Voices, a podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries. On this podcast, we talk to Academy volunteers and leaders, as well as friends of the Academy, about what inspires them about their work, both professionally or as a friend or volunteer with the Academy. Please, subscribe to Actuary Voices on your preferred podcast platform. Today, Bill Michaelson, the CEO of the American Academy of Actuaries, is in conversation with Darrell Knapp, the Academy's president.
You mentioned health, and obviously the Academy has other practice representation, including casualty, life, risk management, financial reporting, and retirement. What does that benefit mean to the profession, having that perspective and ensuring that we can bring that perspective for specific practices, but also a cross-practice, collaborative perspective?
I think that's one of the unique things about the actuarial profession, is that although we all call ourselves actuaries, there's, much as in the medical profession, there's very distinct practices and expertise that are tailored to each area. And I think the way the Academy organizes itself around those practice areas allows us to have very credible, very experienced volunteers be working on each of the issues, as opposed to kind of a more generalist approach to the issues that may not give the depth or the real nuances to possible solutions.
Another area that the Academy covers is around professionalism and education. Can you talk a little bit about what we've been doing to enhance availability of continuing education, particularly around policy issues and professionalism topics?
I guess one big piece on that has been the webinars that we're doing, that if you look just a few years ago, that the ASB tried to do one webinar a year, for example. And now they've really tried to do, a couple of general webinars plus webinars as each new standard is coming out, and even as some draft standards are coming out, to try to really make sure that professionalism education, that those standards of practice are more widely, knowledge of what's in those standards of practice are more widely dispersed. So I think there's been a heavy focus of trying to create more education opportunities for someone that wants to be involved in that. I think the same is true for the ABCD and, other issues such as the Committee on Qualifications and even just the Code of Conduct, that we have, significantly ramped up the education that we're offering there.
And we know from members that they view our continuing ed, particularly our free recorded webinars, which are member benefit, that's one of their top benefits. How do you view member value in the context of what the board's been working on? You mentioned employer value, but just how do you talk about member value and employer value together?
From member value, there are several aspects to that, and it really depends on what your own personal outlook is as a member. As you mentioned, the CE is just an incredible value, that you have several very high quality webinars that you can listen to as recorded webinars for free. But even the live webinars are, a value that's kind of unmatched if you'd look at other continuing education and the cost of that continuing education. I think another area of member value is the actuarial profession having a voice in public policy. That one's harder to measure. It's not a financial measurement, but I think most actuaries would feel like this is a wonderful career. And as part of that you want that voice to be heard in public policy. The opportunity to volunteer for the Academy is a great way, again, to enhance your education, to credential yourself, to provide value. The MAA credential itself, we're looking at, how do we increase recognition of that? But even without, additional efforts, it's, mentioned in, a lot of laws and regulations. It's highly valued when you go and talk to the NAIC. The MAA credential carries a lot of weight. So I think that, all of those things have significant member value. The one thing that I'd kind of throw on top of that, the professionalism aspect, we're in a unique situation that we're a self-regulated profession and have, significant professionalism effort, all of which are really supported through the Academy. It's an enormous value. I mean, to me, the professionalism is probably, although you can access it otherwise, that's probably one of the main values that the Academy provides is it really gives our profession a structure and a core behind it that is just, very unique in terms of other professions.
I often say membership is an investment in you and the profession. As an employee of a large employer, how do you think that member value proposition translates to employer value?
Again, I think that will vary significantly from employer to employer. I think there's several things. One is that as a means of attracting and retaining actuaries, I think I would have looked differently at a possible employer if they weren't supporting the Academy. If they did not say that they would cover dues for the Academy, I think as a recruit looking at that employer, I would look at that employer very differently. I think that the continuing education, that employers are spending a lot of money in continuing education support. And I think, what the Academy offers is, again, a very cost-effective way to fulfill a lot of the continuing education requirements that we have. I think the other aspect of that is what their employee actuaries can gain, both in knowledge and in leadership development and in training through, volunteering and being involved with the Academy. Again, employers, may have significant programs in terms of leadership development and everything, but they can really get a lot of that from, for free from the Academy through letting their employees volunteer in those roles.
So as president, you have a unique vantage point, particularly around how the Academy interacts with other U.S.-based actuarial organizations. How would you describe the collaboration we have with our peer organizations, and what has that meant to you as a volunteer, as a member, and as president?
It's hard for me to answer that question without thinking about history. That I'd probably say a few years ago, I think the actuarial organizations were at odds with each other and not being involved in leadership with the Academy or other organizations for that matter, beyond, being a committee chair or something, that I didn't understand why. It seemed to me like we really ought to find a way to work together better. I think now we're in a situation where we aren't working against each other, but we probably haven't hit the optimum of working together. I mean, we aren't doing as much to collaborate as I think I, would personally like to see, and that's probably been one of the things that I was hoping I could get a little bit further on as president or in my presidential year than what we've really managed to accomplish it. But I think, a lot of that is baby steps, and we're, continuing to progress forward. And I think everybody that I've talked to as leaders of the other actuarial organizations all kind of feel like that's the right direction to go, but sometimes they don't know how to get there.
Right. So we have work to do, but progress is being made. Excellent. So you mentioned the Academy is a mature organization. We turned 60 this year. What stands out looking back on those 60 years? Not that you've been in the profession that long, but as president, you're privy to a lot of the history and where the Academy's been and where it's going. What stands out to you?
Really, I guess I look at public policy and answering that question. If you look back on these significant programs that have, come into place over that time period. And, the knowledge that the Academy's been there supporting those programs is just, awesome. That it really is wonderful to think about that our profession has had a role and has been there to support and influence a number of programs that are really the bedrock of our social insurance and security of financial system.
What about the future? What are you most excited about for the Academy's future?
I think I'd get back to really excited about the ability to collaborate with the other actuarial organizations. I think that that's a real difference maker, and some of them I think are, relatively easy. Like we each have some focus on attracting people to the profession and how do we make the profession known to people in high school or early in their college career that may have a math aptitude and choose to do that. And each of us kind of freestandingly have some effort towards that, but we aren't doing a good job, of collaborating and saying, here's the way we can really, influence people in that respect. I think public policy research, all of those areas, there's a lot of room for collaboration that we have an opportunity to improve things. I think the other side is just doing a better job of communicating, all of the wonderful things that the Academy does.
Darrell, we've talked a lot about the profession as well as your role volunteering at the Academy. What about you? What are some things that you like to do?
So probably the one thing that kind of surprises me that I wouldn't have expected several years ago, but I spent a lot of time doing bike riding. A few years ago, my daughter and I did the bicycle ride across Iowa, which is a 7-day bike trip across Iowa, and now I've done that several years. And there's an interesting analogy to that ride that they have a registration that the people could register, and it's a couple $100 to register for the ride. But they have a lot of people that, it's all on public roads, so they have a lot of people that don't register that get the benefits of, pass through towns where they have all sorts of services and everything, get all of the benefits of everything. And I draw an interesting analogy with that to things the Academy faces, that there's a lot of people that choose not to be members of the Academy and get all the benefits, the professionalism benefits, get the benefits of the actuarial voice in public policy, but they don't contribute. And I really think that, sometimes just as I feel like people should pay the registration for the ride across Iowa, they should also join the Academy.
Well, Darrell, thank you so much for your volunteering with the Academy, for your efforts, your presidency, and your leadership. This has been a great year, and no doubt you will continue to make great contributions on behalf of the profession, and we look forward to that. So thank you.
Darrell, Bill, thank you so much for your time today. You've been listening to Bill Michaelson, the CEO of the American Academy of Actuaries, who is talking with Darrell Knapp, the Academy's president. My name is David Nolan, and I'm the host of Actuary Voices, the podcast from the American Academy of Actuaries, which is celebrating its 60th anniversary this year. Please visit our website, actuary.org, for a wealth of information about the work that the Academy does. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn as well. And of course, please subscribe to this podcast on your preferred podcast platform.